behind the bar at one of JJ Food Services customers here in London. Just give you a few tricks which might help you to make sure that your coffee's perfect every time. A few things I often notice when I walk into a place, group handles are down. Keep them in and attached. This will make sure that the actual portafilter retains its heat. If it's left down, obviously that metal is going to cool down, and the moment my water runs through, the temperature of the extraction will drop and your coffee is going to change. So these need to be kept warm at all times. Foamy milk is easy once a barista's been shown how to do it the right way. What you want to hear from a barista is at the very first phase, your oxygen has been forced into your jug and your milk is moving around. So your barista's objective is to create almost a vortex movement inside there. At a maximum of 36 degrees, but quite likely before that, your steam wand will go below the surface, because up until this point it was just on the surface, which allowed for that noise. As I go below the surface with my steam wand, I'm just creating a vortex movement, which will help to break down those micro bubbles I've created. Now, the other important thing is to make sure you're foaming just the amount of milk you need. Milk should be foamed once and once only. This is where it gets tricky, because there is not one place where a barista should hold the milk jug and the steam wand. My objective is to create a vortex. So a good idea is to be somewhere where I can cause a nice, clean vortex movement. So I'm at such a point where I'm going to open up the steam wand enough that it's going to start pushing everything around. That's the noise you hear, and then I lift up slightly and it becomes quiet. So this movement now is breaking down those bubbles to make it nice and smooth. All done well, I should have no bubbles. And if I do that, it should become silky smooth. You don't have bubbles inside there because bubbles are created after 36 degrees. Espresso should take roughly 20 to maybe 30 seconds to give me 20 to 30 mils of coffee. If it flows through to the top of the cup, the problem is you're taking out too much flavor, too much not good flavor. It becomes unbalanced. You might have a ristretto, which is going to be a little more concentrated, but also a concentration of oils and sweetness in the cup. The moment I put it in is the moment I'll start extraction. Hit the button, cup under. My flow rate should take about 20 to 30 seconds. In this case, I'm using a double for making a flat white. It should not be too fast, it should not be too slow. In this case, it's flowing a little bit fast, but it's still giving me enough crema that if I need to make that into a cappuccino or an espresso, I've got all the flavor I need. If I use a slightly higher dose, or if I grind slightly finer, it's going to make the water flow through slower. As it flows through slower, it has more time to absorb flavor. So if I want greater flavor, I can adjust my grind size. So the general idea is quite simple. Take it out, bang out any grounds, old grounds, and give it a clean inside there. If I was to leave old residual of coffee which has been used before, it naturally is going to affect the new cup of coffee. So I want to make sure everything's clean to begin with. We give it a flush. This flush helps to remove any coffee which might be stuck to the top. So at least I'm starting with everything as clean as possible. In terms of hygiene, you should make sure you have a separate cloth which is only used for your steam wand. Ideally that's made of microfilter as opposed to sponge, which of course will absorb your milk. Every time we foam milk, before we start, just to let out any built up condensed water. Then I would foam my milk. As soon as I finish, I take my cloth, I clean on the outside, and this is the important one. I clean the inside by doing that again. Your tamper. Your coffee needs to be ground and tamped in such a way that the water cannot flow through too quickly. Because remember, if the water passes too quick, I can't pull enough flavor. So they should be tamping with the same amount of pressure, and that pressure is 20 kilos. 20 kilos is this. If I can lean on it, whether I'm big and I weigh 94 kilos, or whether you're a barista is small and tiny, weighs 50, that leaning pressure is more or less going to be the same. So by using a tamper, it helps to make sure that every barista is tamping in the same way and therefore giving us a constant extraction of espresso. We're going to make sure the coffee is level before I begin. Why is this? If I had coffee all built up here and nothing here, Even as I tamp it, the water flow is going to go through where it finds least resistance. So before I tamp, I need to make sure it's as flat as possible. I take my tamper, not the most easiest way, but to show you, making sure it's nice and vertical, I tamp. A small twist just to make sure that it's nice and flat. All going well, it doesn't fall out. At this point, I've got a nice bed of dry coffee which has been ground fresh. As my water flows through it evenly, it's going to pull out the right amount of flavors into the cup. Behind the bar, there are a few things that you should look out for. Grinder is, of course, transforming your beans into powder form. Now, if your grind size is too coarse, as the water runs through the coffee, it runs through too fast and doesn't have time to pull out flavor. If your coffee grind is too fine, it's pulling out too much flavor, so your cup of coffee has too much flavor. You want the right amount of flavor, not too little and not too much. So a grinder is the very first start. If the grind is too fine, too much flavor. If the grind is too coarse, not enough. For each espresso, you want to use 7 to 9 grams. Now I realize that there's also a big difference between 7 and 9. So the idea is that you might try 8 and then possibly a barista would move it around a little bit if he has experience. If a barista is changing the grind size, realize that the first coffee that comes out will be a little residual from the one before. So in this case, I threw it away just to make sure that when I do a test, I am actually using the freshly ground coffee with the new grind size, not a mixture of the one from before. Here we have an on-demand grinder, which means that nicely my coffee has been ground directly and freshly into my portafilter. Fresh ground coffee is going to have a lot more flavor than coffee which was ground half an hour ago. I have 16.6. So when I said before 7 to 9 grams, we're in there. So every time I make an espresso, the ground coffee is going into here, it's running through here and into our portafilter. Now this is nice and clean, but a lot of the time that will build up with a lot of oil. A quick check is to take off the filter basket and just have a look inside there. If you find this is dirty and rancid, try and make sure they clean it. And this can be done often throughout the day. All I need to do is take off the filter, which may be difficult. There are a few tricks there. Rinse it under hot water, which I can take from the machine, and just with a cloth or even a paper towel, just give it a quick rinse like this.